He came for a simple catch, but pulled out something worth more than money. Yet the real value was hidden much deeper. Ready to find out how it all ends? Subscribe, watch the next videos, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The morning came quietly, as it always did in the little lakeside town, with a pale sun pushing through the fog and the wooden walls of the old house creaking as if stretching after sleep. Frank Miller woke before the light had fully settled, not because he wanted to, but because worry had long ago replaced the need for rest. The ceiling above him bore brown stains from last month's rain, and in the corner of the room stood 2 metal buckets, catching slow drops that fell with the rhythm of a tired clock. He lay still for a moment, listening to the familiar sound, then pushed himself up with a soft groan that matched the creak of the bed frame. His joints ached the way they always did when the cold hadn't yet left the floors. Beside him, his wife Mary shifted under the blankets, trying to stifle a cough that never truly left her these days. Frank reached out and touched her shoulder gently, the way someone touches something fragile and priceless, afraid it might crack under the slightest weight. "You should try to sleep a little longer," he whispered. She shook her head. "You have to get going," she said, her voice but warm. "The fish won't jump into the boat on their own." Frank smiled faintly, but the smile didn't stay long. On the small kitchen table waited a stack of bills he had been pretending not to see. The top one was from the electric company, the next from the pharmacy, and beneath that lay 4 more, some folded at the corners, all stamped with red dates that had already passed. The numbers weren't large by the standards of people who live comfortably, but to Frank they looked heavier each month, like rocks being quietly added to a pile he was forced to carry. He stopped in front of the table, staring at the total he already knew by heart. He picked up a small worn-down calculator, tapped a few buttons, and frowned at the result, even though it hadn't changed since yesterday. He tried subtracting imagined income, adding hope, dividing worry. But the answer was always the same. Not enough. Never enough. He opened the small tin box where he kept whatever was left from selling fish, $8. He took a breath through his nose, slow and tired. That would cover just enough gasoline for the boat's motor to get him to the deeper parts of the lake and back again. If the motor didn't stall, if the wind didn't turn, if luck for once did not walk away from him, Mary appeared in the doorway, leaning slightly against the frame. "It'll be okay," she said. And though she sounded sure, her eyes betrayed uncertainty. She noticed him staring at the bills and forced a smile. "We've made it through worse." Frank wanted to believe that. He remembered times when they were younger, when the world had felt wide and full of possibility, back when he used to say things like, "Give it time and we'll make it work." And Mary would laugh and agree without hesitation. But the years had not been generous. One by one, the possibilities had evaporated, and the plans they once had, small, simple plans, had slowly become illusions, replaced by the more pressing goal of surviving each month without losing too much ground. "You need the medicine," he said quietly. Mary looked away. "I'll be fine." "You won't," he answered, not unkindly. "You need it." "And you need a new motor," she replied, lifting her chin. "Doesn't mean we'll have either." He didn't argue. They both knew the rules of their life now. When something broke, they learned to endure it instead of fix it. When something was needed, they went without it. Survival, not comfort, had become the only goal that made sense. Frank packed what he needed: rope, bait, tools, a thermos of lukewarm coffee, and stepped outside into the cold air. The grass was stiff with frost, and his boots made a soft crunching sound with every step. Across the narrow dirt road stood the small auto shop that had once belonged to a family friend, now run by a man who didn't do favors. Frank approached the open garage where the man, Carl, was tightening bolts on a truck. "Morning," Frank said. Carl didn't look up. "If you're here about the part, I already told you. I know. I just wanted to see if maybe—" "No," Carl snapped. "Come back when you've got the money." Frank nodded once and stepped back. He wasn't angry, just tired. He had learned that desperation didn't move people the way it used to. Everyone had their own troubles now, and pity was a luxury hardly anyone could afford. He walked past the rusted mailbox and reached the lake road, a long, cracked stretch of asphalt with weeds breaking through its spine. A stray dog trotted along the edge, tails swinging lazily as if nothing in the world was urgent. Frank envied that, to exist without clocks, without numbers, without the grind of what comes next. The market was quiet when he arrived. A few people were already setting up their stands: fresh apples, homemade jam, second-hand clothes, jars of pickles with handwritten labels. One woman selling vegetables nodded at him. "Slow day?" he asked. "Seems like every day is slow now," she replied. "People don't buy unless the price is cut in half, and even then they ask if it's the last price." Frank unpacked a few fish from yesterday, laid them carefully on the ice he had barely been able to make the night before. He didn't need a sign. Everyone already knew what he sold and what he charged. A middle-aged buyer walked by, glanced at the fish, frowned, and said, "I'll take them all, but not for that price. Too old." Frank swallowed the sting of pride and nodded. "Name your price." It was humiliating, but arguing wouldn't keep the lights on. The buyer paid a few dollars less than even the low rate Frank had set, and walked off smiling at his victory. Frank folded the money into his pocket, feeling the familiar ache in his chest. Not anger, just the quiet weight of being pushed below fairness again and again. The lake waited for him, gray and still beneath a sky that seemed unsure whether it wanted to rain or clear. His boat, old but reliable in its own stubborn way, rocked gently against the dock. The wood beneath it was dark with moisture and moss, and every step made the planks groan. He checked the knots on the ropes, the bait inside the cooler, the small rusted anchor. Everything in his life needed replacing, but nothing could be replaced. So he patched, repaired, tied tighter, and hoped the wind would stay kind enough to let things hold. One more day. He pushed off and guided the boat out onto the water. The motor coughed, resisted, then finally came alive with a rattling sound that no longer frightened him because he knew its language. The lake looked endless from where he stood, though he knew every bend and every shadow. He had spent more than 30 years on that water, in all seasons, in every kind of weather. And yet, something in it always felt like a test, like a question being asked over and over. How much longer can you keep trying? He cast the first line. Nothing. The second, nothing again. The third brought in only a small perch that wasn't worth the cost of the bait. Still, he continued, because that was what a man like him did. He didn't expect miracles. He expected effort, exhaustion, and maybe a little luck if God hadn't forgotten him completely. By the time the sun climbed higher, the rhythm of the lake had taken over. He worked in silence, his hands moving from muscle memory, untangling a line, tying a hook, setting another cast. The sky above remained pale, as if holding back something, and the wind stayed low, pressing a faint chill into the water. Then came the tug. It was small at first, a slight resistance the way driftwood sometimes caught on the net. But then the pull grew heavier enough that the rope strained in his hand. He leaned back, trying to work it free, thinking perhaps he had snagged a sunken log or a piece of old metal debris. The lake was full of forgotten things, bicycles, tires, tools, and once even a safe rusted shut and empty. But then he saw something glimmering beneath the surface. Not silver, not fish scales, something denser, something solid, something shaped. The net came up slowly, bringing with it a weight far too heavy to be part of the usual catch. Frank squinted, leaning closer. A shape emerged, coated in dark mud, tangled in strands of weeds. It looked like a curled, compact figure, no bigger than a man's hand, but noticeably heavy. He reached into the net, pulled it free, and set it in the bottom of the boat. The object was cold, metallic, dirty, but beneath the grime, something shone a faded gold tone. Not the color of brass, not the color of paint, a deeper, fuller glint. He stared at it, breath caught between suspicion and disbelief. Whatever it was not normal, not trash, not something someone had thrown away lightly. The shape felt deliberate, the weight undeniable. He had no idea yet what he was holding, only that it did not belong to the lake, and that finding it did not feel like luck, more like the beginning of something he was not prepared for. He looked at it again. Mud slid down the shape, and a sliver of gold flashed beneath the sunlight. And for the first time in many years, the world did not feel predictable. It felt like it had just taken a breath. The boat rocked gently on the quiet water as Frank stared at the object resting at his feet. It was no larger than a man's palm, but the weight of it seemed to sink through the boards of the boat, through the lake, through him. He picked it up carefully, brushing away the cold muck clinging to its surface. Beneath the grime gleamed a dull, heavy yellow. Not brass, not copper, real gold, or at least it looked like it. The figure was shaped like a horse, rearing on its hind legs, finely detailed even beneath the dirt, its mane carved with delicate precision. Frank turned it in his hand and felt an unfamiliar heat rise in his chest. He had pulled many things from this lake, rotten logs, tangled wire, the occasional rusted tool, but nothing like this. He held it up to the light, and the sun caught the edge of its flank, sending a flash across the water. For a moment, everything around him seemed still. The distant hum of insects, the whisper of reeds, even the lapping of water against the hull. He felt as though he had dredged up not an object, but a secret. When he returned home, the world looked the same, but his perception of it had shifted. The peeling paint on the porch, the broken gutter, the tired face of his wife waiting at the window, all of it seemed poised on the edge of something about to change. He walked into the kitchen, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots, and set the wrapped object on the table, covering it with an old towel as if it might draw attention simply by existing. Mary was asleep on the couch, her breathing soft but uneven. Frank didn't wake her. Instead, he carried the bundle into the small shed behind the house, where he kept his fishing gear, shut the door, and turned on the single bulb hanging from the ceiling. He unwrapped it slowly, as though performing some quiet ceremony. The figure's details became clearer now under the steady light. The horse's eyes were tiny hollows, the hooves delicate and polished, the muscles defined by patient craftsmanship. On the underside of the base, faint but legible, were two engraved letters, ES and a date, 19-something, the last digit worn away by time. Frank ran his thumb across the markings. Whoever made this had cared about it, or at least cared about the one it was meant for. It wasn't something discarded, it was something lost. He hesitated. Then curiosity got the better of him. He fetched a rag, a toothbrush, and the old bottle of rubbing alcohol he used to clean tools. Bit by bit, he scrubbed away the lake's years of neglect. The more he cleaned, the more the gold shone, and with each new glint, a quiet sense of awe grew inside him. When the last patch of dirt came off, he set it on the workbench and just looked at it. It was beautiful and valuable. It had to be. Frank's heart began to beat faster. He knew nothing about gold, but he knew what it could mean. Debts gone, a working motor, medicine for Mary, maybe even a real roof over their heads. He found himself thinking about numbers again. How much a single ounce was worth. How much this might weigh. He laughed under his breath, the sound half disbelief, half fear. Then quickly he wrapped the figure back in the towel and tucked it behind an old crate of bolts, as if hiding it from his own temptation. He couldn't sleep that night. The image of the horse glowed behind his eyes, gold even in the dark. Around midnight, he gave up trying to rest and sat at the kitchen table with his phone. The internet was slow, but after several minutes, he managed to load a few pages. Gold price per ounce, he typed. The number on the screen made him blink. Then he typed again. Small gold statue value. The results were staggering. Even a small piece could fetch thousands, maybe tens of thousands if it was old or handcrafted. Frank leaned back in his chair, staring at the cracked ceiling. For the first time in years, a kind of dangerous hope crept in, the kind that whispered of relief, of comfort, of being able to breathe again. He could fix everything, the bills, the medicine, even the truck. He could make life right. He could make it fair again. He didn't notice how tight his hands had curled into fists until his knuckles began to ache. But hope brought another voice with it, the voice of caution, of memory. He remembered his father standing beside a boy who had just found a lost wallet near the general store. "You take what's not yours," his father had said, "and it might feed you for a night, but it'll starve your soul forever." Frank had returned that wallet. His father had been proud. That pride had been worth more than the money inside, or at least it used to be. He shut the phone off and stared at his reflection in the dark window. "That was a long time ago," he muttered. "Different times." Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that the reflection staring back at him didn't agree. The next morning, he went through his routine as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Every motion, every sound felt different. The scrape of the knife on toast, the hum of the refrigerator, the cough of the old motor outside. Even Mary's quiet voice, asking if he was all right, seemed to come from a world slightly out of sync with his. He lied gently and said he was fine. By noon, he couldn't resist checking again. He went out to the shed, pulled the crate aside, and unwrapped the figure. The gold caught the midday sun through the dirty window, scattering light across the walls. For a moment, Frank forgot his worry. The thing was mesmerizing. Later that day, at the small convenience store in town, Frank stopped to use the Wi-Fi. He didn't want to search from home, afraid somehow that the act itself might make the secret less his. He sat at the corner table with his coffee and looked up antique markings, rare gold pieces, engraving identification. It didn't take long to find similar figures, auction listings, private collections, museum photos. None were identical, but the craftsmanship, the style, it all pointed to the same thing. The statue could be worth a fortune. He closed the search page quickly, afraid someone might see. His heart pounded, not from excitement this time, but from a strange growing dread. He walked home slowly, his mind a storm of possibility and guilt. The sun was low by the time he reached the house, the lake catching the last orange light of the evening. He thought of the gold hidden inside his shed, and the silence surrounding it. He thought of Mary asleep in their small living room, and he thought of what that little figure could mean, not just for him, but for her. That night, while dinner simmered quietly on the stove, Frank turned on the old television. The local news channel was playing. He barely listened until a sentence caught him off guard. Local businessman Henry Stanton has issued a statement regarding a missing family heirloom, said the anchor. Frank froze. The object, a small gold horse statuette, was lost over a decade ago near Lake Heron. Stanton, who lost his daughter in a tragic accident years earlier, says the statuette was the last gift she ever received before her passing. Frank stared at the screen. A picture appeared. A smiling girl, maybe 10 years old, holding a golden horse in her hands. It was the same. The same pose, the same rearing stance, the same engraved base. There was no doubt. The voice continued. Mr. Stanton is offering a substantial reward for any information leading to the item's return. The room seemed to shrink around him. The flickering light from the TV cast the figure's shape on the wall behind him, ghostly and perfect. Frank's throat felt dry. He turned the television off, but the image of the girl's smile didn't leave him. She couldn't have been more than 12 when she died. The statue had belonged to her. He thought of the initials E, and now they had a name, a story, a face. He sat at the table for a long time, motionless. The reward could solve everything, yes, but to claim it, he would have to admit he had found what wasn't his, and if he sold it quietly, no one would know. No one but him. He walked to the shed again, opened the door, and stood in the common doorway. The air inside was cool and heavy. He picked up the towel, unwrapped the statue, and looked at it under the single bulb. The gold shone warmly, but it no longer looked beautiful. It looked accusing. The horse's raised hooves seemed to freeze mid-leap, caught forever in the act of leaving something behind. Frank felt as though it was asking him a question he didn't want to answer. He put it back down, wrapped it carefully, and placed it where it had been. Then he turned off the light and closed the door. Outside, the lake reflected the moon. Frank stood for a long time watching the still surface, thinking about all the things that must have hidden over the years. Things dropped, things lost, things buried, and now it had given him one of them back. But gifts like that, he knew, always came with a price. He just didn't yet know what it would be. The night after seeing the news report felt longer than any Frank could remember. He lay awake beside Mary, staring at the ceiling, replaying the same thoughts over and over like a loop he couldn't escape. The statuette wasn't just valuable. It belonged to someone, to a family, to a little girl who would never grow older than the age she'd been in that photograph. The truth of that settled over him like a weight, heavier even than the object itself. He turned on his side and watched Mary sleep, her breathing uneven, her hand resting weakly against her chest. Her medicine was running low again. The last refill had been stretched as far as it could go. If things continued like this, she wouldn't last the winter without proper treatment. And that thought brought him back to the golden horse. It was still there, still waiting, still promising salvation if he was willing to silence his conscience long enough to listen. By morning, the decision still hadn't formed, but the pressure inside him had grown sharper. He knew he couldn't keep pretending nothing had changed. Not when every moment was becoming a negotiation between what was right and what was necessary. He left early, claiming he needed to check on the boat, though what he really needed was space to think. The shed door creaked when he opened it, and there under the old towel was the statue, as brilliant and silent as ever. He held it again, letting the weight settle into his palm. It didn't feel like treasure. It felt like a question. Before he could answer it, he heard footsteps behind him. Rick, his neighbor, a man who lived 3 houses down and treated life as something owed to him, not something earned. His eyes were always searching, not for beauty, not for truth, but for angles, opportunities, shortcuts. He leaned his elbow against the shed door frame and smirked. "You've been different lately," Rick said. "Quiet, and you weren't at the market this morning? Something good happened?" Frank hesitated, too slow. That was enough for Rick. He moved forward a little, glancing past him. "You've been hiding something," Rick guessed, voice low and sly, "and it's not another bucket of perch. What did you find out there in the lake?" Frank didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence did it for him. Rick clicked his tongue once in triumph. "Thought so?" Frank wrapped the statue again and set it aside, trying not to show how uneasy he felt. "It's nothing you need to worry about." "Nothing I need to worry about?" Rick laughed. "Come on, Frank. I've known you too long to believe that. Men like us don't get quiet over nothing. We get quiet over money." Frank turned to leave, but Rick stepped in front of him, lowering his voice. "Look, I don't need all the details. I'm not asking, but I know a guy. One phone call, and he can take whatever you found. No questions, cash on the table, no paperwork, no government, no news stories. You keep your life simple. You don't even have to leave town." Frank stared at him. Rick looked excited, almost fevered, like a dog hearing the rattle of a food bowl. "You'd rather go begging to some rich man on TV?" Rick scoffed. "You think he's going to cough up a reward that'll change your life? I've met men like him. They'll give you a handshake and a gift card to the grocery store, and you'll come home with your pockets empty and your tail between your legs." Frank's jaw tightened. "It's not about that." "Sure it is," Rick said. "It's always about that. You think being honest ever paid a man's bills? You think that little speech you're writing in your head, 'I did the right thing,' is going to keep your wife alive? Don't be stupid, Frank. Life doesn't reward the good. It rewards the bold." Frank didn't say anything, but inside something twisted because part of what Rick said was true. Not the sneering parts, not the parts soaked in bitterness, but the underlying reality. Mary needed help. The house needed repairs. The motor wouldn't survive the winter. And he, at 52 years old, had no backup plan, no savings, no safety net, just that statue, that impossible, dangerous statue. Rick watched him think and mistook the silence for agreement. "Just say the word. I'll make the call." Frank didn't respond. He walked past him and out of the shed, and Rick let him go, confident the idea had already rooted itself where it mattered. That afternoon, Frank drove to town and stopped at the small jewelry store near the hardware shop. It was a place he'd walked past 1,000 times without ever needing to enter. He felt strange as he pushed open the door, like someone stepping into a world where he didn't belong. The man behind the counter was polishing a watch through a magnifying visor and looked up with mild annoyance, the way one does when interrupted by someone unlikely to spend money. "Can I help you?" the jeweler asked. "I'm just looking to get something identified," Frank said. He kept his voice calm, steady. The jeweler raised an eyebrow. "Gold, maybe?" Frank unwrapped the statue just enough to show the gleam of metal. The jeweler's expression changed. Not shocked, just alert interest. He took the piece with both hands and examined it slowly, turning it beneath the work light. "This is old," the jeweler murmured. "Handmade. Late 19th century, I'd guess. And yes, it's real gold. Solid, no plating." Frank's stomach tightened. "If you're looking to sell," the jeweler continued, "I can take it off your hands. I'd have to run a few more tests, of course, but I'm sure we could reach a number." Frank already knew what kind of number it would be. Not the true value, but the value of desperation. He didn't bother asking. Instead, he said, "Do you know anyone who buys pieces like this without paperwork?" The jeweler didn't even blink at the implication. "Yes," he answered, "I do." He slid a paper across the counter with a name and phone number. "If you want to go that route, he'll pay cash quick. But if you choose that option, don't expect to see this horse again, no matter who it belonged to." Frank took the paper, folded it once, and slipped it into his pocket. The jeweler didn't ask questions, didn't offer judgments. In his world, morality was just another tool useful only when profitable. On the drive home, Frank pulled into an empty lot and sat with the truck idling. He took out the paper and stared at the number written on it in clean, careful ink. A single phone call could change everything. One moment of decision, one trade, money for silence. No reward from a stranger, no gratitude, no news stories, just a private transaction and a future stabilized by something he would never have to admit he stole. But his chest felt tight. And when he imagined making the call, he also imagined Mary asking him someday, "How did we afford all this?" and himself answering with a lie that would sit in his throat like a stone. He tore the paper in half, then in half again, then into shreds, so small they could never be put back together. He dropped the pieces into the trash can outside the truck stop and walked away before he could reconsider. But even after that, peace did not come. That night, after Mary had fallen asleep, Frank sat at the kitchen table again. He held the statuette in his hands, the light from the small lamp catching the gold just enough to make it glow like a quiet flame. His father's voice echoed in his thoughts, not a memory of words, but of tone, of presence, of expectation. Do the right thing even when it costs you something. Frank wasn't ready to say he knew the right thing, but he knew the wrong one, and he had just torn it into pieces in a parking lot. He took a deep breath, pulled his phone from his pocket, and opened the browser again, not to check prices, but to search a name. Henry Stanton. There was an address, there was a phone number, there was a gate in front of a house far bigger than anything he'd ever seen. He stared at the screen, and then finally, quietly, he nodded to himself. He wasn't ready to return the statue, but he was ready to stop pretending he hadn't already decided. He wrapped the horse in the towel again, placed it gently back into the shed, and turned off the light. When he stepped outside, the wind had shifted, and the lake was moving restlessly under the moon. A choice had been made, and now the consequences would begin. The morning Frank left for the Stanton estate was cold and gray, the kind of morning that carried the weight of unfinished things. He woke earlier than usual, not because of habit, but because sleep had never fully found him. The decision he had made in silence now demanded action, and there was no comfort left in delaying it. He moved carefully through the house, trying not to wake Mary as he dressed. She stirred once, opened her eyes halfway, and asked if he was heading to the lake. He hesitated, then answered, "Not today." It was the closest he could come to telling the truth. He kissed her forehead and left before she could ask anything else. The statuette was wrapped in an old flannel shirt and placed inside a small box which he kept on the passenger seat beside him. Even through the cardboard, he felt its presence like a heartbeat. Driving with it felt different from merely owning it. The weight was no longer just physical. It carried expectation, consequence, and the undeniable sense that the world was no longer waiting for him to decide, but watching what he would do next. The closer he came to Stanton's property, the more the landscape changed. The worn houses and dusty roads gave way to manicured lawns and stone walls, the kind of environment where money lived comfortably and quietly. The estate itself was impossible to miss. Tall row iron gates, a long driveway lined with oaks, and a stone house big enough to hold everything Frank owned 10 times over. He pulled up to the intercom, nerves twisting in his stomach, and pressed the button. "Yes?" came a voice, calm, polite, impatient. "My name is Frank Miller," he said. His voice felt strange in the air, too small for a place like this. "I'm here about the statuette, the gold horse." There was a silence, then a short reply. "Please wait." The gates opened slowly, and Frank drove in, watching the path curve through an immaculately kept property. The truck's engine sounded embarrassingly loud against the quiet. When he parked, a man in a dark suit security, not a butler, met him and directed him to the entrance. Frank stepped out, took the box from the seat, and followed him inside. The foyer was filled with light, high ceilings, and the faint smell of polished wood. Paintings lined the walls, portraits, landscapes, faces of people who didn't know hunger or unpaid bills. He waited near a large staircase, clutching the box like something that might slip through his fingers if he blinked. Then Henry Stanton entered. He was older than Frank expected, a man whose posture suggested strength that hadn't faded, but whose eyes held the quiet grief of someone who had spent too many years remembering instead of living. His suit was neatly pressed, but his expression was worn. He studied Frank briefly, then the box. "You said you're here about the statue," Stanton said. His tone was neutral, guarded. Frank swallowed, nodded, and opened the box. He unwrapped the flannel shirt slowly, the golden horse emerging piece by piece, as if resurfacing from the past itself. The moment Stanton saw it fully, he stopped moving. His eyes widened, not in disbelief, but in recognition deeper than words could express. He reached out, but did not touch it, as if afraid it might vanish. "That's it," Stanton whispered, voice breaking in a way that revealed more than any story could have. "My daughter's, Emily's." Frank gently placed the statue into his hands. Stanton held it carefully, almost reverently, his eyes locked on the engraving that Frank had stared at so many times, ES and the faded date. Stanton's fingers trembled, and for a moment he looked less like a wealthy man and more like a father who had just been handed a memory he thought was gone forever. "She loved horses," Stanton said quietly, almost to himself. "She used to line them up on the mantel one by one and tell me which were the brave ones and which were the gentle ones. This was the only one that was real gold. She said it would last longer than she would. I told her not to say things like that." Frank stood still, unsure whether he was meant to speak or simply bear witness to the moment. Stanton finally looked up, eyes heavy with gratitude. "Where did you find it?" "In the lake," Frank answered. "Caught in my net. I didn't know what it was at first." "You could have kept it," Stanton said. "Sold it. No one would have known." Frank nodded. "I thought about it." That honesty earned a small, tired smile from Stanton. "But it wasn't mine," Frank finished. "It belonged to someone who cared about it. I couldn't pretend otherwise." Stanton took a breath, then gestured toward the sitting room. "Come with me." They sat across from each other, the golden horse resting between them on a polished table. Stanton's voice hardened, not in cruelty, but in business-like clarity. "I offered a reward," he said, "and I intend to honor it." Frank stared at the statue, then shook his head. "I didn't come here for money," Stanton's brow furrowed. "Then why did you come?" "To give it back," Frank said. "That's all." Stanton studied him for a long moment, then spoke with quiet conviction. "You deserve to be compensated, not for the object, but for the choice. Most men don't give back what the world doesn't force them to return." Frank hesitated, wanting to refuse, but Stanton's tone left no space for argument. "Let me put it another way. I cannot do anything for my daughter anymore. I can't return her life. I can't return the years. But I can choose what to do in her name. And I choose to thank the man who brought something of her back to me." There was no pride in the words, no theatrics, just sincerity. Frank gave a small nod. "Then, if you insist, don't give it all to me. Use part of it for something with her name on it, something that helps someone, a children's hospital, a fund, anything, something that feels like it honors her." Stanton's eyes softened, and for the first time he looked not just grateful, but moved. "You speak like a father," he said. Frank lowered his gaze. "I speak like a man who's almost lost someone he loves too." The room fell quiet. An assistant was called in, papers drawn up, signatures made, everything documented so no one could ever call it theft. No one could ever say Frank took what wasn't his. He was handed an envelope, not thick, not stuffed with more money than a man could hold, but enough, more than he had ever seen at once. Enough to fix the roof, to pay the bills, to refill the prescriptions, to change the quiet weight of survival into something that looked like hope. When Frank stood to leave, Stanton walked him to the door, the horse statue now placed safely in a glass case behind him as though it had returned to its rightful place in the world. "You did something honest when you didn't have to," Stanton said. "That matters, and it doesn't go away." Frank nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The man who opened the door for him on his way out, the same guard who had barely acknowledged him when he arrived, gave him a respectful nod now, as if something unseen about him had changed. Frank drove away with the envelope beside him, though he did not touch it. The road home passed by the same fields, the same broken fences, the same worn storefronts, but they looked different now, not because the world had changed, but because he had done something that allowed him to face it without lowering his eye. He didn't feel rich, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel small. The drive back from the Stanton estate felt quieter than the drive there, though the truck made the same old noises, the same rattle in the engine, the same brakes that sighed whenever he slowed. But inside the cab, something had shifted. The box was gone. The statue was gone. And yet, instead of feeling empty, Frank felt a strange fullness, like a long breath finally released after being held in for too many years. The envelope containing the reward sat on the seat beside him, but he didn't touch it. He wasn't afraid of it, only aware of it, the way one is aware of something that can help but cannot define a life unless allowed to. When he pulled into the driveway, Mary was standing at the front door, holding a blanket around her shoulders. He hadn't told her where he was going, but she seemed to sense that whatever he had set out to do was done. He stepped out of the truck, tired but lighter somehow. She didn't ask him anything right away. She simply reached for his hand. "You look different," she said softly. "So do you," he replied, noticing how she seemed to be breathing a little easier that day, as if hope, even distant hope, loosened something inside her. They went inside, and Frank set the envelope on the table. He didn't open it in front of her. He didn't need to. Money wasn't the part he wanted to explain first. He told her this story slowly, beginning with the moment he dragged the statue out of the lake, continuing through his doubts, Rick's involvement, the offer from the jeweler, and ending with the moment Henry Stanton took the gold horse in his hands and cried the way a father cries for something that can no longer be fixed, only remembered. When he finished, Mary's eyes were bright with tears. Not sadness, but a fuller emotion, the kind that lives between pride and relief. "You gave it back," she whispered. Frank nodded. "I had to." "No," she said gently. "You didn't, but you did anyway." He looked at the envelope again, then finally opened it. He counted enough to cover the debts, enough to fix the roof, enough to buy the medicine she needed, enough to repair the motor and salvage his work before winter. It wasn't a fortune by the standards of the world, not the kind of wealth Stanton lived among, but to Frank, it was more than anything he had ever held at once, enough to change the world around him, if not the world itself. "I didn't take all he offered," Frank said. "The rest is going to a children's fund in his daughter's name." Mary's eyes softened at that. She'd like that. I think so too. The next week was a quiet kind of victory. A man finally came to fix the roof, hammering away at the shingles that had leaked for 3 winters. The pharmacy clerk didn't hesitate when Frank paid for months' worth of medicine in cash. The mechanic didn't shake his head or sigh when Frank said he wanted not a used part, but a new one. The boat engine, once a thing held together by willpower and worn bolts, hummed with something close to confidence. Even the air in the house seemed to lift as though the walls themselves no longer braced for the next collapse. People at the market noticed the difference. They didn't know the story in detail, only that something had happened, something rare. Some guessed he had come into money suddenly and quietly. Others assumed he had finally caught a break on the lake. A few shook their heads and said no one in this town ever got lucky unless luck wanted something back. Then someone showed him the newspaper, the small local paper that never had real headlines anymore. On page 5, beneath announcements about school board meetings and a lost dog, sat a short article. "Local fisherman returns lost heirloom. No questions asked." There was no picture. Frank preferred it that way. Just his name, a paragraph about honesty, and a single line quoting Henry Stanton. "Mr. Miller reminded me that there are people who do the right thing without expecting applause." Rick came by a few days later. He stood in the doorway, quieter than usual, not swaggering the way he always had. He brought with him an old spool of fishing line, one that had belonged to his father. He held it out awkwardly, like an apology wrapped in something small enough not to feel sentimental. "Thought you might use it," Rick said. "It's strong, doesn't snap easy." Frank took it, nodded once. Neither of them said what both of them knew. Rick expected betrayal, and instead learned something he hadn't planned to learn, that not every man who has little will trade his character for more. "You did good," Rick said finally, eyes lowered. "Even if I don't understand why." "You don't have to," Frank answered. "Just know there's more than one way to come out ahead." Rick almost smiled. "Maybe I'll figure that out someday." That evening, Frank sat with Mary on the porch, a small wooden horse figure resting on the railing beside them. Not gold, not valuable, something he'd bought for a few dollars at a craft shop in town, because it seemed fitting to replace the emptiness of what was gone with something that didn't need to shine to matter. The wooden horse didn't carry a story, at least not yet, but it would. It would come to stand for something else. Not wealth, not loss, but the choice that sat between them. The sun dipped low over the lake, the water turning the color of copper before fading into stillness. When the wind moved across the surface, it rippled like quiet applause no one could hear but those who had earned it. The next morning, Frank went back to the lake. He loaded the boat the same way he always had, but the silence around him felt different. He cast his nets into the water, knowing this time he wasn't hoping for a miracle. He had already had one, and he had returned it. When the motor started, its sound was smooth, steady, no longer coughing against time. The lake opened in front of him like an old friend. Not a test, not a threat, just a place where a man could work without shame. He pushed off, and the boat cut through the water, leaving a widening path behind it. A path that didn't sink, didn't vanish, didn't drown itself in regret. For the first time in years, he felt no need to look back. He knew what he would see there, a man he could live with. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. There are more stories already on the channel waiting for you, so check them out right after this video. And if this one made you think or feel something, share it. Someone else might need it too.